Hello, students. This is American Government, Unit 3, Lesson 2, and we're going to be talking about the United States Senate. Okay, so you should have already heard a lesson on the House of Representatives, and here is your bell work for that. So before you continue, please make sure and do your bell work for today. Okay, so today we're talking about the United States Senate, and we want to learn some of the differences between the Senate and the House. But we're actually going to start with something that's similar. In both the House and in the Senate, most of the work of Congress happens in committees. So, committees are groups of people, congressmen, who decide whether or not bills should be passed. And a lot of the drama that happens in the Senate happens in committees. Committees can have people come in and testify on a particular topic. Committees can do a lot of research. Committees is where a lot of the arguing happens. So if you've ever heard kind of some of the big blow up arguments that they've had in the Senate or in the House, most of those happen in the committee room. Now in the House, every House member's on two, but the senators, because it's a smaller group, are put on several committees. Here's some of the basic info about the Senate. And you remember, of course, most of this from the Constitution. One thing to make sure and understand is that there's no term limits. That means they can have the job until they die, and also if they get reelected. And then the other thing to understand is that they're staggered. That means that every 2 years, 1/3 of them are up for reelection. So the Senate has this term called the coolers. What do we mean by this? Well, let's go ahead and just take a second and read this little portion from James Madison, one of our founding fathers. Okay, so pause the video and read this. So in this video, James Madison is saying that the Senate is supposed to guard against sudden shifts in public opinion. What if all of a sudden everybody in America just decided that something was a good idea? Like, oh, we should get rid of all the nuclear weapons. Well, the Senate is supposed to guard against sudden shifts in public opinion where everybody changes their mind, but maybe it's not for our safety or whatever. So the Senate is supposed to be, and you can see he even uses the word wisdom, supposed to be wise. What I mean by coolers is like pouring cold water on some hot coals. If somebody has some sort of crazy idea, the Senate is supposed to cool them off. Here's another example of this from our history. This is a famous story about a breakfast meeting between Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. We don't actually know if this story is true, but whether it's true or not, it's become part of American folklore and legend, and it really has helped to shape what the Senate is supposed to be. So take a second and read this story. So hopefully you paused and read this, and you read the fact that Thomas Jefferson is saying, hey, why do you have two chambers of Congress? Why is there a House and a Senate? And Washington is saying, why did you pour that coffee into your saucer? So think of like a little teacup and a tea plate, a cup and saucer, pouring it into the plate to drink it. And Jefferson says, well, to cool it down, I don't want to burn my tongue. Even so, rejoined Washington, we pour our legislation into the senatorial saucer to cool it. Again, another reference to this word cool and this idea that the Senate is supposed to slow down, cool off kind of crazy ideas. So what makes the Senate unique? Well, the Senate is supposed to be elite lawmakers, literally rich and well-educated. I mean, that was the goal of the founding fathers. They're in office longer than presidents. Presidents come and go, the Senate remains. Because their terms are so much longer, they're supposed to be insulated from public opinion. And just imagine, if a president dies in the middle of a war, like for instance, FDR died in the middle of World War II or towards the end of World War II. Well, it wasn't over yet. And so, things that needed to keep going can continue uninterrupted. Our country was fine. We did not fall apart just because our president died. Why? Because we had a Senate of men and women who knew what they were doing, who had been around for a really long time, and they could continue our government. So, originally, the Senate was elected not by the people, but by the state legislatures. But the 17th Amendment changed that, and now we elect our senators in each state. One of the other things that's unique about the Senate is that they're a smaller group and they're supposed to be really respectful. Now, that doesn't always happen, but it's certainly different than in the House. In the House of Representatives, it tends to be a little bit more chaotic, but the Senate is supposed to be full of decorum. They have very, very strict rules about how they're supposed to talk and how they're supposed to treat one another. Like they call each other usually by the state name. So like instead of saying, Senator Berg, they would say the senator from South Carolina. And it's just a way of showing like respect to each other. Another way they showed respect is they never tell someone to stop talking. So like, if someone stands up and is supposed to just talk for a few minutes, but they keep going, there are no time limits. It's assumed that a senator is speaking as long as they need to. So if you have something to say, you can say it, and there's no time limits. Now, I'm sure in your mind, you're thinking, wait a minute, if there's no time limits, how do you get anything done? Well, that's the problem. The Senate does have some leadership, okay? The vice president is actually president of the Senate, and he basically doesn't do anything except break a tie. The president pro tempore is the one who sits in the big chair and is called the president. They call him Mr. President. But the reality is that he doesn't really have that much power. He kind of is just like a figurehead. He kind of keeps it moving. But you'll find out in a minute, he doesn't have a ton of power. This just makes me laugh. I had to throw this in there. This is our old president pro tempore. He was a Democrat. He's no longer in office, or he's no longer president pro tempore, Patrick Leahy, but he did a cameo on Dark Knight. So if you ever watched that movie, the Batman movie, you saw him there. There is leadership, okay, in the Senate, very similar to the House, with the majority whip and the majority leader, minority leader, minority whip. So of course we're talking about the political parties. So remember in the House of Representatives how the Speaker of the House had a ton of power? Well, in the Senate, the president pro tempore does not have that kind of power. That power is not the same. Because in the Senate, this whole respect thing is kind of taken to this other level. Every senator, all 100 senators, have equal rights to the floor. That means that the president cannot tell somebody, stop talking, go sit down. No, if you're a senator, then you have a right to the floor. The Senate also doesn't do anything unless everyone is in agreement. Now, not everyone, a majority, but they vote. Okay, I'm not making this stuff up. The Senate votes on everything. They vote whether or not to start debate. They vote whether or not they should end debate. They vote on voting. Like, should we vote to vote? Are we ready to vote on this bill now? Well, basically, it's a vote to end debate, because that would mean that you're ready to vote now. They vote on like compromise bills. So, okay, you can imagine this takes forever, absolutely forever. The Senate is extraordinarily slow. I mean, so many things can derail it. Somebody just starts talking and goes and talks for 5 hours, 3 hours. That's just a really, really long time. Here is one of the ways that the Senate goes so slow is because they have a filibuster. A filibuster is when you literally keep speaking. You don't stop talking, and you just keep talking. Okay. in order to learn a little bit more about this, I have another video that I want you to watch. And then